Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, and I'm excited to be speaking with Spain today. So we're going to Europe where we're catching a train down to the southeast. And my next guest is a digital change maker, creating social learning systems to empower Black people, women, people with disabilities, and other marginalized populations in the technology and education sectors. Serving as a mobile technologist, trainer, and researcher, she has 16 plus years of professional experience spanning 5 continents and the public, private, and civil society sectors. A Black and Native American cis woman excelling with ADHD, she also has extensive experience delivering action-oriented training, integrating themes of racial equality, justice, and gender with global perspectives. Dr. Ronda Zelezny-Green, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Florence. It's good to be here and to be in this space curated by yourself. So very honored to have received an invitation to participate.
Wonderful, wonderful. So let's jump right in. Ronda, tell us where you're from, where you are local, and what is your craft?
Sure. So I am from the United States, actually from Tampa, Florida. So I'm local right now to Spain, just outside of Alicante, Spain, on the Costa Blanca. And my craft is empowerment. So working to empower people, whether that's through training, learning, and development, or through coaching, or just being that friend who's going to tell you, you go ahead, boy, you're doing it, being that cheerleader.
Nice. Empowerment as a craft. I think we need a lot more of those kinds of personalities in the corporate sector, most definitely.
Absolutely.
So Rhonda, tell us, how does a young woman from Florida find her way to 5 continents? Tell us a little bit more about that journey.
Sure. So growing up, I always had this, passion for traveling, in the sense that my parents took us on the only vacation that I can remember to somewhere in Southern Florida. And after that, I always was like, oh, can we go on another trip? And we just never did. And growing up, I think Black parents are very good at, like, when you're poor, you never really know it because they do everything for you not to know that. So
Yeah.
I now understand, that I grew up in poverty, or in a working class kind of family. And so that was not really possible for us financially as a family of 5, my 2 parents and 3 children. And so, when I went to university, I actually went to a women's college, which is not very common nowadays, although there are, several famous single-sex institutions in the US. It was still not very common. And when I went there, kind of their brand was to help women find their voices and to be empowered. And one of the ways that they did that was through experiential learning. And so one of my majors as an undergraduate was in Spanish. And the first time I ever traveled abroad was to Mexico. And so I was in Cuernavaca, Mexico, and that was about 55 minutes south of Mexico City. And Cuernavaca is the city of eternal spring. And the time that I had there, I just absolutely loved it. I came to adore the Mexican people. And that experience kind of set me off on, connecting my younger self with my adult self and confirming, yes, the wanderlust is there, it's genuine. And so after that, the rest, that, as they say, is history. I went to, after that abroad trip at school to work on and improve my Spanish, I went to the UK and Europe for the first time to study abroad at Oxford University to do international business. And that made me fall in love with Europe, which is why I'm now back here, kind of the best of both worlds in Europe, but in a Spanish speaking country. And so after those experiences, like many young people, didn't know what I really wanted to do after graduating, and became a teacher, like doing English as a second language teaching. And so how I ended up on so many continents was being a teacher traveler. So, teaching English as a second language, but then deciding, hey, really is a profession for me, and kind of committing to that. So it went beyond just doing English as a second or as a foreign language, and also went to the other things that now define my career, which are like gender, tech, diversity, equity, inclusion, so forth. So all of that, like my career was my passport.
Got it. So, I'm always curious about people who travel the world teaching English as a second language. And, I know people that have traveled from Ghana, friends of mine have done it as well, like lived in Japan doing it. So what are the mechanics of actually becoming a teacher as a second language in another country?
Well, surprisingly, like many things, one of the first requirements appears to be white. Like my
Oh.
reality in my first experience teaching abroad, it was really frustrating at times, because at the time we went abroad, I held a license for teaching English as a second language, and I knew other people who did not, and maybe they had been teachers or just
Mhm.
had a bachelor's degree. But by and large, as a Black person applying to teach in South Korea, many doors, digital doors, slammed on my face, or just not even responded to, because I was Black. And there was this idea that to teach English abroad, in South Korea in particular, the idea was that language is in your blood. So when people saw me, they could not believe that I was American. They did not believe
Okay.
that I was American. They thought I was African, and that there was no way that I could teach English. So when and where I did get job offers in South Korea, sometimes they were substandard terms and conditions from my colleagues and things like that. So for me, that was really eye-opening, because at that stage, South Korea, had their super fast internet and all of those things at their disposal, but you still heard comments like this, not just from the students, but these are the teachers, the people who are hiring. So that was
Mm.
my first experience. And I think the universe said, okay, we need to heal you from that.
Mhm.
And my next experience was in Equatorial Guinea,
Okay.
which for me was, it was my first time in Africa at that
Mhm.
stage. It was in a Spanish speaking country that I'm ashamed to say that as a Spanish language graduate, I had never heard of this country. Were never taught about it. And
Mhm.
that for me got me really thinking, like, wow, what kind of curriculum are we being fed in schools where we don't learn that there's a Spanish speaking country in Africa and learn that the history of that. So being
Right.
there was incredible, because I was looked up to. People were so grateful to have me. I actually worked at
Yeah.
an oil company teaching employees who were eventually meant to take over operations from the American company that I was working with. And so that experience, just feeling the love and the gratitude for what I was doing, I still keep in touch with several of my students from there. And I was there 2007 to 2008. So well over 10 years ago.
Mhm.
So that experience was incredible. But then after that, I went to Madagascar as part of the Peace Corps, as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer. And
Okay.
that experience again became jarring, because depending on where I was in the country, if I was in the very central part of Madagascar, I was called slave. I was not thought to be American because of my skin color. But then on the coast, where there were predominantly people who looked like me, like African people, it was completely different. And there, because I'm a plus size woman, though my weight became the center of attention, not my race or my appearance, like my appearance in terms of race, it was, my size. And so, as I mull that over, I'm like, gosh, mainland Africa remains the place that I had the best experience, because I was able to really and truly be me, not
Yeah.
only as a teacher, but as a person. And, the exchange of respect, the respect I have for my students, not just what they had for me, being invited into their homes, whereas they had never invited any of my colleagues, all of whom were white. So, I've had really very eclectic kind of experiences in this space, all of which, have helped me to learn and to see, I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is very much a US construct. So I always try to speak in the language of intersectionality, which was also a US construct, but one that allows for more global perspectives to emerge. And so all of these experiences, after teaching first in the US and then South Korea, Equatorial Guinea, Madagascar. Later on, I've had teaching experiences in Germany, in the UK, in Colombia, several other countries in Africa, several other countries in Asia, and all have their own, things that I remember. But I think those first 4 experiences I share, because they were so huge for a young person in their career to kind of experience those things.
So wow, that's fascinating, because it's very interesting, because the friends that I have that taught were all of color, and they went to Asia for the most part. And then a friend from Ghana who went to the Soviet Union had a really rough time. So I definitely can understand the idea that, yeah, the prerequisite is if you're teaching English, you are a white person. So, very interesting. So then you were teaching, and you had to figure out what's next for me, I'm thinking. And so
Yeah.
this is a kind of combination of why the where, like, how did you come to be living and working and playing where you live, with a little bit of a meander through maybe some of the other experiences that you had before landing in Spain.
Sure. So, I started teaching in 2005, and started in the US, which was a incredible experience. And I had an incredible mentor teacher to support me in that first year in the United States. And then I went to South Korea, Equatorial Guinea, Madagascar. And while in Madagascar, I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm kind of in it now. So let me take this further. Let me build on it and let me get serious, because, I hadn't studied it formally, like teaching or pedagogy or anything like that. So the next step for me was to study and actually get to know my craft, from a theoretical standpoint. So
Okay.
I was going to do a distance-based master's at that time at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And I applied, I got in, and then there was a coup in Madagascar, which at the time, being in it, it was really scary. But now, I can look back on it and say, wow, what a time. But, when the coup happened, the US Peace Corps decided to end the program at that stage. And so I returned to the United States. And because I was going to do that program distance based, I said, okay, well, what if I do it in person? And so I moved to Boston in 2009 after getting jobs, because at that stage the financial crash had happened, and they were like, there was nothing, right? There was nothing. So I was like, I will take what I can get there. So I went and got a job at a college in the Boston area. And so I did the program face to face. And that actually turned out to be a transformative gift, because all I knew was at that time, distance-based masters weren't really a thing.
Right.
And also people looked down on it. And so, when I went there in person, I did not know that these people that I was studying with were people who had worked and taught with bell hooks. I did not know that these people who had worked and talked with Paulo Freire. And when I say that, I don't mean just like, oh, they met, bumped into each other at the conference. Like, they co-authored publications with them. And so they were like proteges of these giants of education and, doing that 2-year course and really learning radical education approaches, critical literacy, really understanding what it means to be a teacher, kind of spoke to me in my soul, because it helped me to see like all the things, the questioning that I would do in school and the way that I saw things as a teacher myself. I understood why that was, and kind of how my orientation was. And so that course and program changed my life on that front. Another front on which my life was changed was during that course I took, during that program, I took a course called Technology and Education. And that was where I hit on, okay, I'm super passionate about this. So during the Technology and Education course, we were given an assignment to read about mobile learning. And at that stage, given my past teacher traveler experiences, like tech and education was mostly for computers, and I had never thought about using the mobile phone. And so when I read this article, I was like, oh my God, that's it. And I just became so excited and was like, yeah, this is the thing to do. This is great. And I became obsessed. And I knew then that was what I would want to do a PhD in, like something related to technology and education. But then because I had this experience living and working abroad and doing a lot of work in international development, I was like, that's another area where I'm doing the work, but I don't actually have the theory and to know why I feel and I position myself the way that I do. So I then, after completing that master's, I did a second master's in practicing sustainable development, returned to the UK to do that. And then, similarly got a lot of radicalizing in the sense of, being very leftist and pro-poor, pro-marginalized people, so on and so forth. And I think that, for me, all of these experiences kind of came through serendipity. Like, I met at that program in University of Massachusetts in Boston, I met my two professional mentors who are like, absolutely incredible. And they have kind of informed my approach to empowerment and what it means to support somebody, because what they have done for me has changed my life in terms of the opportunities given, contacts made, encouragement, just everything has been super, super lovely. And so with all of that, getting into the tech sector then kind of brought me into another world of traveling, because for the job that I held for the majority of my tech career, working for the Global Trade Association for the mobile industry, I traveled extensively. I remember 2016 was a banner year. And that year I was in Nigeria, Senegal, Spain, South Africa, Myanmar, Samoa, and I'm probably leaving off one other country. And it was like nothing to just be going there. Like that was what I did, because at that stage I was teaching government policymakers and regulators about telecoms policy, which I had developed expertise in parallel, because that was one of the jobs that I had when living in Boston. And then I just stayed in the tech sector after that. And so being able to now combine my passion for tech, my passion for training, learning, empowerment into one was like a dream come true. And so after I left the GSMA, I got a role with an organization where you could work remotely. So even before the pandemic, my current organization, we were working remotely. And so that enabled me to, make the transition here to Spain, although I still maintain a residence in the UK as well, because I go back very often, including for getting my hair done there.
Okay. That's a real Glocal experience.
Yes.
So that's really interesting. You were working with governments and working on telecoms policy. And this is, I want to say that 2015, 2016, 2017 were really high tech transition phases, right? Like
Yeah.
this is the beginning of Bitcoin, I think. So tell us more about the landscape of the tech side of needing to navigate and speak with governments and really raise people's awareness about the policies that are affecting their people.
Sure. Well, I mean, you hit on it perfectly. At that time, like, let's say between 2000 and 2010, from a technological standpoint, we saw the entire world getting increased access to the internet, not necessarily through fixed line connectivity, through mobile connectivity. So
Right.
we saw exponential growth during that first decade. But then what we saw in that next decade, the one that just concluded, was that in parallel to a lot of people coming online, it's almost like we are infants using an extremely adult,
Hmm.
instrument, right? So you see bad behavior, you see things happening that you don't want to happen. I mean, we didn't know it at the time, but in 2014, of course, with Facebook and all the disinformation that was beginning at that stage, online scams, cyberbullying. In fact, one of the things when I was living and working in Boston I did youth leadership workshops. That was part of our college outreach to try to build a link from high school to college, and we would do youth leadership workshops. And increasingly at that time, I mean, there were, I want to say in those 2 years, there was a high school girl that killed herself each year due to cyberbullying. So we
Oh, wow.
saw all of these kind of bad behaviors emerge. And
Mhm.
so the work that I began to do with policymakers and regulators was very much around, all right, we know this bad stuff is happening, but you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, in the sense that you want to try to address the problem, but instead of addressing the problem, you're actually impinging on freedom of expression, or you're actually, you think you're protecting children, but actually you're causing them harm in these different ways. And so it became almost like a diplomat role, in the sense that obviously I was working for the mobile telecommunications industry, and they have a very specific agenda, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
even with that very specific agenda, there were a lot of things that you can make connections to governments, like benefits, things that would also be beneficial to them and their people, that you could not immediately see, because the thing that you are responding to is the sensational activity or behavior that you're seeing happen online. And
Right.
when you're doing that, a lot of my diplomacy and outreach became around, how do I calm things? How do I cool the temperature? How do I use data to help them inform their decision making? So, I can't get into details about every single engagement that I had,
Sure.
but it was
Mhm.
always with that in mind, trying to get governments to understand the consequences of regulatory or policymaking actions, but from the perspective of, this is what's going to help serve your citizens in the long run. And one of my most favorite engagements that I had in this experience was working with the government of Nigeria, because prior to that engagement, my colleagues who were traditional, like, lobbyists, were going in trying to get the government to do, I can't even remember what it was. They wanted them to take some sort of action that the government was not willing to do. So
Mhm.
they kind of sent me in as a Trojan horse to do a training on the use of mobile technology and international development. And so at the beginning of that training, everyone was very tense. It was very confrontational. I think people were like, what is the point of this? And by the end of it, they were like cheering my name. I was invited to meet with the minister at the end of the engagement. And it was because the education that I had from my first master's program, and meeting people where they are, and kind of thinking strategically, like, how can you engage with these issues in a way that's going to empower them,
Yes.
that kind of opened up opportunities for me in a way that it hadn't for my colleagues. And after that, my colleagues called me and they said, "What the hell did you do?" Because now they're talking to us, they're listening to us. What did you
Right.
do to get them to open up? And it was, the combination of all of that. So for me, it was always pleasurable to engage in scenarios where, number one, you don't see many Black faces. Like, of course, when you're in Africa, you do. You don't see many female faces either. So working at the very high levels of government to do things that would impact entire nations, that for me was a great responsibility that I took very seriously and made the most of it to benefit the people of that country that I was sent to.
Wow. Kudos to you. So let me ask, particularly since you mentioned Nigeria. So recently they took a step to ban Twitter.
Yes.
And, across Africa, I think Ethiopia is probably the other place where the government has, shut down the internet at times. I'm not sure if it's shut down now, but they have at times in the last year. So what can the people do? Like because this is now kind of like it's like water, the idea to have mobile technology, Wi-Fi, just internet access is almost a necessity for survival for a lot of people. So how can the people respond? And what are your thoughts on just the whole the path towards the government shutting down Twitter and the path back from something like that?
Sure. So like, what can everyday citizens do when they're in these circumstances? So, we address this a lot at my former employer, and we also kind of look at it at my current employer. But from my own personal experience, what I've seen, what I've read about is that the more you try to suppress, it's going to become a never-ending game of whack-a-mole, because you may cut off Twitter, someone else can create a new social media platform that people similarly flock to and say and do things that you as a government will not like. And one kind of common shared tool that has been noticeably absent across most governments, whether that's in sub-Saharan Africa or North America, is the fact that no one is really teaching about what it means to be a digital citizen, how you should behave online, what is the social contract for being online in these spaces, what you should and should not do, and why this kind of stuff matters. Like, no one is looking at it from that perspective. I think, in parallel to the telecommunications changes that were happening the past 2 decades, increasingly we have seen people turn away from having a well-rounded education that connects people to the world around them and solely focusing on high stakes, like, oh, you got to know your math, you got to know your science, you got to know this, you got to know that. And everything else is kind of left to parents if people have them, or left to households if people have stable ones. And that's simply not good enough. And I think that, many of the governments have been taking, what I would consider to be a ham-fisted approach that is honestly not sustainable, because the more you try to suppress the power of the people through these platforms, the more that it makes them want to rebel. I was just reading about how, activists in Nigeria are already thinking about, like, okay, what are some other ways we can be engaged online? Like, this is not going to stop what the government was trying to prevent. And so I think, the dialogue that needs to be held is really, getting to the heart of what governments fear. And I think, probably a lot of people would say that a government that fears its people is a healthy government, right? Because you never rest on your laurels. But I think, what activists, the citizenry can do is to ask for and push for more resources that will help, make kind of change. Because returning to what I said about us being infants using these adult tools, technology has leapfrogged ahead of what we are able to comprehend in the sense of how we can appropriate it. I think when everything came out about Facebook and what they have been doing since 2014 in terms of data selling, targeting, misinformation, disinformation, I would have never believed it until you saw the scale of just what they did. But not having that literacy and that awareness that something like that was possible, made me a prime target for what bad actors were trying to achieve. So
Right.
knowledge is power. And that is how we need to address this in the first instance. We can't, address something that we don't even know is a problem. And the fact that most curricula make no space anymore for any kind of, civics education, social
Yeah.
contract, any of
Yeah.
that, that's a
Yeah.
huge problem the world over.
Exactly. I would echo that most definitely. Like being in education in Ghana and Africa, I see that it's a very not well-rounded, as you said,
Yeah.
very, I don't even know if it's tools because, math and English and science without context of the real world is pointless, actually.
Definitely.
So, what does it mean to be a digital citizen? What would you describe as what that process is, and who leads that?
Sure. What I think it means to be a digital citizen, there are incredible people working in this space that I'm aware of. So one woman I'd like um to pay respect to, homage to, is a British Ghanaian activist called Seyi Akiwolo.
Okay.
And she's based in the UK,
Okay.
and she coined the term digital self-care.
Mm.
And a lot of her work sprung forth from a speech that she gave in the European Parliament that generated a lot of very racialized, misogynist abuse directed her way. And her organization called Glitch came about because she's like, there is a glitch in the system. Like something is fundamentally wrong when, we would never dream of saying these kind of things face to face, but online we will say anything. And so
Mhm.
digital citizenship to me, like, in the United States pre-Trump, let's say,
Right.
it was not okay to be openly racist face to face to someone, right?
Right.
That's changed slightly now, but generally the general public thinks it's abhorrent. Even if they are that way in private, no one wants to be that in public. And it's the same thing, online. Publicly, people are awful. Like people will
Mhm.
say it, not only say it with their chest, but have themselves so easily traceable that you know who it is who has said these things. And so I think the idea that, we need to have this social contract, not just for the people that we encounter face to face in our daily lives, but also those people that we encounter in the digital sphere, is one of the things that needs to happen. And there's so many people like Shade that are doing incredible work in the space to raise awareness, to say,
Mhm.
hey, we need to talk about this. And not only do we need to talk about it, we need to operationalize it in a way that is going to have positive impact. So they do a lot of things around workshops and things like that, how to stay safe online. There's a lot of engagement that is done with the various social media platforms to get them to put in safeguards that, hey, it may affect their metrics or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's also going to keep people safe online. We don't have to
Right.
watch another live stream suicide. We don't have to
Right.
watch another, incident of racial abuse against notable people just because they don't make the game winning score. We
Mhm.
don't
Mhm.
have to live with that. That doesn't have to be our reality. But
Mhm.
until we kind of advocate for that change and recognize that while we have done a lot and have made a lot of progress even in our face-to-face interactions, we still have a bit of a ways to go. And I think the disconnect that people see between the online sphere and the face-to-face physical sphere needs to be disrupted, because increasingly our technologies that we have in our lives are metaphorical and in some cases literal extensions of ourselves. And so what does
Mm.
that mean for how we interact with each other? No one has really sat down and kind of wrote a treatise on what this means or what it could look like in practice. And I think, devoting more time and resources to that, and from a people perspective, so not asking the tech platforms to come up with something like that.
Right.
It has to come from the people, like, what people will want to know or see happen.
Yeah.
That's what I think we need.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like part of that starts with really going back to what education is. What are the basics of education? Because we, in the West, we have the luxury of devices and having these tools in the classrooms. But as you're saying, I don't believe that they're in ICT education that I've seen abroad. It's just about the device. It's
Yes.
not really about what it means. And as you said, the metaphorical extension of who you are and how you present and how you tell your story to the world. So, something to definitely think about. Like education policy has a long ways to go. I feel,
Yes.
yeah, there's some real rethinking that's necessary. So speaking about citizenship, let me ask you my Glocal Speak question. So we want to hear what you hear. I asked my guests to share a word, phrase, or saying that is a meaningful part of your local experience and why or how you came to value it as Glocal Speak.
Ooh, gosh, I would say intersectionality, which I
Okay.
know is a buzzword.
Uh-huh.
But I think for me, every time I engage with literature around that or with people who understand what that means, for me, it is the starting point for empathy,
Mm,
developing empathy for other people, being able to see, even if you don't agree, being able to see things from someone else's perspective,
mhm.
being able to listen without the need to, like, okay, I'm listening just so I can respond, but listening for listening's sake.
Right.
I think that, yeah, that is the word for me that has so much meaning. And I value it because it has helped me to see the world in a way that I think is much more nuanced
Mhm.
and, yeah, just, yeah, kind of
Mm.
getting also to the heart of the empowerment, let's say.
Sure. Sure, sure, sure. So you said your craft is empowerment. So tell us more about your current role and how empowerment is a part of your everyday work.
Sure. So, in my current role, I am the global head of training and e-learning for the Internet Society. And so, our mission is to make sure that the Internet of Opportunity benefits everyone. And so, for me, being a woman of color in this role and hearing that that is the tagline, I know that everyone means from the village to the coast, all of that. So we work to offer courses to people all over the world. Currently, we offer them in 3 languages. And the idea is to help them acquire skills in the internet industry that helps them to work as better advocates for the internet, that helps them to understand the technical operations of the internet so that they can kind of work directly to help make things better. They help people acquire skills in the business aspects of the internet industry, again, with the same aim. And one of the things that I love about what I do is that we are absolutely wanting everyone of every, race, ethnicity, country, creed, whatever, to come learn with us, because I think from where I sit, technology has become something where you're probably aware, Florence, like with computer science, all of that, it was pretty female dominated up until a stage where they kind of shifted gears and made it more male focused. And
Mm,
so the way that this field has been shaped has been to be so exclusive. And I can't help but think, my God, what kind of innovations are we missing out on because we
right.
don't have
Yeah.
diverse representation in this
Mhm.
sector? What
Mhm.
kind of, because, necessity is the mother of all invention. And my father never graduated high school, but he was the smartest person, the most creative, the most, engineering things to be like, we're going to get some more out of this. And this is how we're going to do it. Right. Like
Right.
that, missing that ingenuity from the tech sector. How are we preventing ourselves from doing even more good, to
Mhm.
do even better, because we don't have that representation? So that's kind of how I see my role, not just to, offer the courses and make sure people like them,
Mm-hmm.
but to make sure we're reaching as many different people as possible so that we can have more representation here, so that we can, empower people everywhere to do a lot of the stuff that I have been doing in my career. Like, with
Sure.
how big the population is, this is not something that we do alone. We need everyone participating.
Right. So I'm assuming you work with a lot of partners across the globe to implement your projects and programs.
Oh, yeah. We work with governments, we work with civil society, we work with the private sector. We literally work with everyone because that is our mandate. And the organization itself was founded by the people who made the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can imagine, we have been very concerned about, a lot of the stuff that's happening nowadays by governments, because it's like, okay, that's not, that's not what the internet was meant to do. We don't
Right.
mean to, like, in Iran and Russia, they're building their own, Iran and China, they're building their own intranets that are essentially going to cut their populations off from the World Wide Web. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, no, that's not the point. The point is not that. So this is what we're trying to raise awareness of, to create more internet champions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, this kind of dovetails into my mindset hack question. So tell us, what is your favorite or an innovative mindset hack? One that you can imagine or one that you know of?
Yeah, that question for me was very interesting when I read it. And the first thing that came to mind, so like usually your first instinct is always the best one.
Yeah.
Coaching, which may sound
Oh.
odd to you, being that I'm in the field that I'm in, but I had never, I've seen therapists, I've done professional development, learning from other people, but I had never personally worked with a coach until this year. And
Mm.
that has been a hack for my professional life that I did not know that I needed.
Mm.
Getting support on how to navigate very challenging issues at work, even outside of work, learning how you can be even more effective in your role. All of these things that, not that I thought I knew everything, but I always kind of felt like my approaches were, yielding the results that I desired. So if it's not broke, why fix it? But
Right.
having that experience this year completely changed my life. And so I am a huge advocate now of coaches, these kind of
Okay.
impartial people. They're not there to give you therapy, but they are there to help you think strategically in a way that maybe you would not have done in their absence. So that has been a huge hack for me this year. And yeah.
That's a great one, actually, because I have a few friends that are coaches, and just listening to them, I'm due for some myself. So I like that, this is like encouragement, like, oh, yeah, I've been putting that on the shelf, but it's something that I really, really want to engage in because, just as you said, you might think you have it all under control, and you probably have it pretty much well handled, but having someone who is, and that's what a coach is, someone to help you be better at what you do. That's
Yes.
exactly what their role
Yes.
is.
Which, when you put it that way, Florence, it sounds so obvious, right?
Yeah.
And I had never interpreted it to be that way until now. So
Yeah.
yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good. So if you have a recommendation for a coach, we'll put that in the show notes as well, or a resource that you use for it. We'll put that in the show notes so everyone can have a look at that. Wow, Rhonda, this has been really a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking time out to talk with us, to talk about what you're doing. You are our first Peace Corps volunteer.
Ah,
So yeah. So, and it's
wow. That's an honor.
yeah. And so it's interesting that you had one of those Peace Corps experiences that is kind of what the Peace Corps, it's just that you were caught in a coup. That's, I guess, one of the Peace Corps nightmares, I guess,
Yeah.
for people who, what percentage of Peace Corps volunteers are in crisis do you know what percentage of Peace Corps volunteers end up
Oh
leaving their assignments?
gosh, nowadays, no. If you had asked me then, I probably would have known, but now I
Right.
don't know the exact statistic. But yeah, it was, one of those once in a lifetime
Yeah.
things that, yeah, I'll never forget it. And yeah, it stays with me today. It was crazy.
Right. I can imagine. And just thinking about travel, and now, now we're thinking COVID, et cetera, but there are so many different things that can happen when traveling. It's just, and it's just the nature of the world and the globe.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure. And I mean, I have to express my thanks to you as well for inviting me on. I think the podcast and this idea are fantastic. So thank you
Thank
for
you.
doing this work
Thank
for the
you.
culture.
Thank you. So before we let you go, let's
Mhm.
get into a little bit of who Rhonda is outside of all the work.
Mhm.
So can you tell us, are you a reader or a watcher or a listener?
I used to be a reader,
Okay.
but I would say now that I'm more of a watcher
Okay.
because a lot of the stuff that I do read is usually because I've watched something online or, through an article that I've read. So I still love to read, but now I'm kind of having that initial contact through watching something.
What are some of the more interesting watches that you've had lately?
You know what? I haven't actually had much time, but in the past few months, the things that I have watched, and this will show you how diverse. Flight 93 for the September
Oh,
11th
okay.
commemoration. I finally finished that because it's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
I also watched the Love is Blind reunion because, like everyone during the pandemic, I was like, whoa, I just need to switch off completely. And so
Right.
seeing that follow up was great. And then also, I guess I would say my daughter. There's this cartoon called La Granja de Zenon, and it has a lot of very upbeat kind of songs in the Spanish language. And the
Ah,
other day, I saw Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis talk about how they also watch this with their children. So I kind of felt like, oh,
oh.
interesting. We have something in common that does not involve the lack of showers. so so yeah, it's been, all over the place, let's say.
Okay. Those are great tips though. And the kids show, say it again.
La Granja de
Granja
Zenon, which
de Zeno.
basically means the Zenon's farm. And it's an
Oh,
Argentinian cartoon, and it's really popular here in Spain. I'm actually putting it in the chat as well.
okay, wonderful. Oh, nice. Thank you. Thank you for that. So, any last words for our listeners?
No, I think, now's the time maybe that we're not encouraging people to travel as much. But I would say that when it is safe to do so, I can't wait to maybe see some of you all in person.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. That's a great last parting words because yeah, we want to see people and we want to get back to that. So eventually we'll get there again. Yeah. Rhonda, thank you for joining us. Thank you so much. So, listeners, this has been another episode of Glocal Citizens. You can catch us with a new episode each and every Tuesday at www.glocalcitizenspod.com and wherever you get your podcasts. Please do share, give us a review. It helps people find the podcast. And do check out the show notes because we have some great, this has been a wealth of information. So check out the show notes. We'll have great information for you there. And until next time, bye for now.